So, hello and welcome to everybody who has joined us this afternoon for our second of our World Space Week events of 2024. And to our annual You Do Not Need to Be an Astronaut to Work in Space panel. And it's lovely to see so many of you here. I can see the numbers are still going up with people joining us. So, hello and welcome. Today, we're going to hear from Martina, Angus, and Michael. And we're going to hear from each one of them in turn with a section shortly after each one for questions to them. So make sure you are using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to get in your questions nice and early. So without any further delay, let's go to our first panel member, Martina. Martina works here at the Open University as a space instrumentation project manager, and she is also undertaking a PhD researching how we can measure the impact of space activities on our day-to-day lives. And I won't say any more than that because I'm going to let Martina tell you all about it. So, hello and welcome, Martina, and over to you.
Hi, thanks so much, Hannah. It's lovely to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you about what I do in the space industry and how I came to do that. So if I can have the first slide, please. So a little bit about me. From a job perspective, I like seeing things come together, which is good because I'm a project manager, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I have absolutely no science background, which is why I love this talk. I have not come from a science or a space background into the job that I'm doing now. I really enjoy social sciences, and I'll talk a bit about how I'm able to use that interest in what I do now. My current job role, I'm a project manager in space instrumentation and space-related projects here at the OU, and I've done that for about 7 years now. And as Hannah said, I'm also studying for a PhD, and the title of that is Evaluating the Societal Impacts of Space. So I'm going to talk about all these three things in a bit more detail. So if I can have the next slide, please. So, as I said, I have no science background, and if I'm completely honest, I really struggled with science at school. I didn't do science at A levels. I fumbled through my science GCSE. It was the first exam that I took in the GCSE block, and I got really nervous, and I just had it in my head that I can't do science. I don't understand science. So I loved humanities subjects. I went on to do those, did an English degree, didn't do any science A levels, as I say, and I thought I'll have no involvement in science. I leave it at school. I don't need to think about that again, even though I know it's in our daily lives. I thought I don't need to study it, and I can kind of step away from that. So then I have included this picture of me graduating last year with a Master of Science in Systems Thinking, and these two people next to me are my PhD supervisors. So it just goes to show you never know what's around the corner and what's coming. And I think that's a really important point, that what happens at school, you give it your best, things don't always work out how you expect they will, but you never know what's in the future and what's going to come. Next slide, please. So my current job, I'm a space project manager. And that means I manage a team of people, mainly scientists and researchers, at the moment working on space technology. So most of my projects now are detector technology projects, and that's to do with images in space that allow us to see and capture what we see, predominantly the Moon and Mars. And as part of my job, I run meetings, I do the schedule, so what we're doing and when. I oversee the budgets, making sure we don't spend too much, it's a very important one. And I report mainly to the UK and European space agencies. And predominantly my job is to make sure we deliver what we promise. Next slide, please. So some of my space projects that I've worked on, I started working with the Prosper Space team. And this is a fantastic team at the Open University who are building and designing a miniature lab that's going to the moon to do some testing there. And that's where I started. I worked on the Love Me rover. Don't ask me where these names come from. And that's a prototype moon rover. I also worked on Detect, which was a really interesting project using space satellite technology to help map out mosquito larvae so that we can try to combat the spread of malaria. And then from that, Smart, which used the same kind of satellite technology to help with flood mapping. And then now, as I said, I'm working on Detect technology projects. So a real kind of mix of different projects. Next slide, please. So how did I get here? I was a musician for a long time, did lots of touring, and that was pretty much my full-time job. I had an English degree, did a bit of work in communications, branding, that sort of thing, while I was doing music. And then I got to a point where I didn't want to be touring anymore, didn't want to do music. And I got offered a job with the Prosper team. And it was quite out of the blue, and was only supposed to be quite a short-term job. And I was a project assistant. So I came in and I was doing photography, writing up what they were doing in the lab, doing some marketing, website design. It was a real sort of mix of my previous skill set. But I got to see so much of what these incredible scientists were doing and thought, I want to do more of this. Never expected that to happen. So I trained as a project manager, and I was able to do that while I was on the job. And that means I now manage multiple space projects, still loving it 7 years later, and enjoying it so much that I decided to do a PhD. So if I can have the next slide, please. So my PhD, I was really inspired by projects, especially the ones I mentioned using space satellite technology, that help us sort of better understand things like the spread of malaria, flooding, things that really impact our daily lives. And as I said in the beginning, I was always really interested in social science. I never thought I would be able to kind of combine all that with what I do now. And then a PhD was advertised evaluating the societal impacts of space, which just means how space benefits our everyday lives. And I jumped at it. So I applied, got the PhD, and starting, I'm in my first year now. And some of the areas that I get to look at are space activities, how they impact our health, and that could be in cancer diagnosis, in treatments, the equipment in our hospitals, also how it affects how we respond to climate change, the information it gives us, how we can use that, and then technologies which are in our everyday lives, our phones, our GPS that we use to get around. It's in so many different areas that we don't know. So to be able to get to look at that and try and better understand that is really exciting for me. And if I look at where I started and where I came from, I think it's a great example that you really don't need to come from a traditional science background. You can have other interests, and I think the space industry really needs people from all different backgrounds to kind of join and mix in together, and that's how we'll get the best out of it. And that is me.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Martina. It was lovely to hear all that. And your slides are so cute.
I know.
I'm going to have to find out where you got all of those lovely little astronauts from. So there have been some questions flowing into our Q&A box already, which is amazing. Thank you so much. So if anyone has any, drop them into the box at the bottom. We've got a couple of minutes now to go through some questions. If we don't get to them now, we've got some more question time at the end. So if we'll come back around to these. So I'm going to ask the first question that I can see here, which says, are you more interested in science now?
I am, and I think the reason I'm more interested in science now is because I understand it better. And I think when you're at school, there's a lot of pressure to learn certain areas because you're thinking, I've got an exam in this. Whereas now I get to learn because I enjoy it, and it was the reason I did a master's. I thought, oh, I can choose what I learn, and that's been really interesting to open my eyes to a different perspective on science. So yes, I do. I can hands up say I do enjoy science now.
Always good to hear. And the next question comes from Hannah, which says, did you have any interest in space before you were offered the job?
I always was interested in space from a kind of, I I find it very inspiring. I'm in awe of what's around us, but didn't look into it as much as I do now. It was seeing the work of the scientists at the OU and the researchers at the OU. Um, there were so many things I had no idea went on, and it just, I would say, my mind is blown on a daily basis, and there's not many jobs where that can happen. So I'm very appreciative of that. But no, I would never, if someone had asked me, I wouldn't have said, yeah, I'll work in space. No.
I had a similar thought, I have to say, when before I got into my job. So I think a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions coming in from different people on about the same subject, which is how are you finding managing your PhD and working at the same time? Are you part-time one way or the other, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, so I still work full time. I have 5 projects on the go at the moment, but I do my PhD evenings, weekends. Doing the masters, I did the same. So that was a really good kind of trial run for how I manage my time. I would say it's doable if you love the subject. If you kind of start it and you're doing it because you think you should do a PhD, it's going to be really, really hard. If you find something you love and you want to learn about it and research, then it's totally doable. You just have to manage your time very carefully.
Amazing. In fact, there are a few people that are asking this, which was, tell us more about being a musician. Did you play an instrument? Were you a singer? What was it that you did?
Yeah, so I was a singer-songwriter, had quite a long career, did some great gigs, did lots of touring, really enjoyed it. I was a Yamaha artist for a long time. But I always kind of knew there was something else I wanted to do. And then getting kind of more into academia and I something clicked and I just, yeah, I can't imagine doing anything else now. I still do bits of music, but the passion is definitely for what I do now.
Amazing. It's nice to see how those can sort of morph and change
Mm,
throughout the time.
yeah,
Um, the next question is, did you study your master's at the Open University?
I did. Yes. So it was actually during lockdown. I had kind of stepped away a bit from music and I knew I wanted to learn more. So I looked at what the Open University were offering and saw systems thinking, which is about kind of complex problem solving, understanding our world better, having this bigger picture. And I absolutely loved it. So I did that for 3 years with the Open University, again alongside working, and it was fantastic. Yeah.
Amazing. And to manage both of those at the same time is an incredible skill. So well done, which probably brings us slightly onto the next question, which again has come in from a few people who are attending today, which is, uh, did you do a project management course? And if so, which one did you do?
Yes, so I did. So I did the APM fundamentals at first to make sure that I did sort of want to do project management. And then I did a 6-month postgrad module, again accredited by APM, with the OU masters that I was doing. And now APM, keep mentioning them, but it's the route I've gone. So you can choose different ways to approach project management, but they also offer new courses now. And that's with all project management courses that you'll find they change as the industry changes and as different approaches come about. But then project management is also a big part of systems thinking, so it kind of naturally came in from that as well. But I would recommend thinking about how you want to approach project management because some is quite rigid, there's more flexible techniques, very agile techniques. So if you're looking to do training, then definitely think about how you work with people and what your approach would be before you select your course.
Great advice, thank you. I think we probably have time for one super quick question, which is, uh, what is your PhD?
So my PhD is evaluating the societal impacts of space, which just means looking at the benefits of space activities in our everyday lives and how we're going to measure those. So is it really beneficial, or are there some things we should watch out for that might be detrimental as well?
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Martina. We'll hear from you in a little while, but we're going to move on to our next speaker now.
Okay.
So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Angus. So Angus is a PhD student with astrobiology OU at the Open University, and he is looking at finding life in the outer solar system. And with that, I'll hand it straight over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Angus Aldis, and I'm an astrobiologist, which is a pretty fancy term for my job just means I look for life in space, which is, I think, really cool. But my specialism is looking at finding life in the outer solar system. So what do I mean by the outer solar system? So these are the four massive gas giants in our solar system. So there's Jupiter, there's Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. My favorite is Saturn, but I'm a bit biased because that's the one that I look at. But I don't look at these planets specifically. I look at their moons, and I look at a class of moon called an icy moon. And there are loads of icy moons in our solar system. These are just some examples, all real images, by the way. But an icy moon is just basically a moon with a massive shell or surface made completely of ice, which is really interesting. But there is something hidden underneath the ice, and we'll start talking about that in a second. So these are just some examples. There's Europa, which is one of Jupiter, which is getting a space mission that is launching hopefully this year. Fingers crossed. There's Titan, which is one of Saturn's, which is my absolute favorite. Or no, oh, I shouldn't have said that. That's controversial because I look at Enceladus, which is another moon of Saturn, and then Triton, which is one of Neptune. But we'll talk about Enceladus a little bit and why these moons made of ice are interesting to me as somebody who looks at trying to find life in space. So Enceladus is really interesting because underneath this ice shell, which remember that's why it's an icy moon, it's got a surface made of ice. Underneath this ice shell is a underground liquid water ocean, which is insane because that could mean maybe there's some life in there. Through recent space missions in the last 20 years, we've realized actually this underground ocean might have the ingredients for life. So all of the lovely chemicals and elements that life needs to survive and grow with. We also found that its core is geologically active, which means it's generating and producing heat that allows this ocean to be nice and warm. Well, warm, it's about 0 degrees, but that's tropical for the outer solar system. But it allows the ocean to just be liquid, so it's not frozen solid. And then also this ice shell is protecting this ocean from meteor impacts, from solar radiation, and from all those nasty bits of space dust that could stop life in its tracks. So it's my job to think about, well, actually, if this moon has all of these cool conditions, maybe microbes are living in this ocean. So that's really interesting. But Enceladus isn't the only icy moon. There are, I think, between 10 and 20 icy moons within our solar system. There's Ganymede, one of Jupiter, which actually has more water than Earth does. So that's really interesting. There's Callisto, there's Titan again. Had to put another picture of Titan in. And there's Mimas that looks a bit like the Death Star. But that's literally within the last sort of couple of months, people are starting to think about how that has an ocean. But I don't sadly have the funding to go to any of these moons. I wish I did, but I don't, unfortunately. So scientists like me use Earth to sort of think about, okay, what could life look like on these icy moons? And we do that at what are called terrestrial analog sites. And these are basically places on Earth that have similar environmental conditions to a planet or a moon within the universe that is not Earth. So the Dalol geothermal area in Ethiopia has loads and loads of hot springs that have sort of similar water chemistry to these potential underground oceans. There's the Lost City geothermal or hydrothermal area, which is a massive complex of hydrothermal vents in the Atlantic Ocean. And we think these icy moons have hydrothermal vents as well. So, it's good to know what's going on. So we use Earth for that. And then Lake Vostok in Antarctica is a massive freshwater lake that is buried under kilometers of ice. So that's a perfect site similar to an underground ocean that's buried under ice. So back to the topic of this workshop, You don't need to be an astronaut to work in space. I look at all these wonderful moons and all these wonderful planets by turning my attention to Earth. And I can research, what life looks like on these moons and planets. I can think about what environments are like on these moons and planets by looking at Earth, which I think is a really nice thing to remember. So I've got about 5 minutes left of my presentation, and I want to spend it by talking about how I became an astrobiologist, how I got to researching these icy worlds, and how you can, pardon the pun, launch your science career. It's awful, that pun, I know, I'm sorry. So in school or throughout life, we're told that a science journey or a career journey should look like this. It should be school, A-level, university, first job, second job, get a dream job, and then you're retired. But career journeys do not and should not look like that. They should be really messy. They should be full of twists and turns, arrows flying in the wrong direction, hurdles that you encounter that can essentially make you go towards your dream job. And I want to talk about actually how my messy science journey unfolded and how it allowed me to become an astrobiologist, because you'll find out in a second that was not my goal in life. So, like most other students in the country, I did GCSEs and I was failing them, which was interesting. And I now make a career out of being a scientist. And I, for the life of me, could not do physics, chemistry, or biology when I was about 16. And I quickly realized it's not me. It's the way that I'm being taught, and it's not my fault. It's not my teacher's fault. It's just the format that I was being taught. So exams weren't for me. Sitting in a classroom wasn't for me. I couldn't learn that way. So my abilities couldn't shine. And so instead of going and doing A levels, I went and did what's called a level 3 BTEC. And this is basically A levels, but you just do coursework and you could focus on a specific subject. So I picked animal management because at 16, I wanted to become a zookeeper. And here's some photos from that time of my life. I wanted to be a zookeeper of lizards and frogs. And you know what? I still find them really cool. So maybe that part of me still is there. Who knows? But I loved doing a BTEC. I loved that messy part of my career because it made me realize, hey, I'm actually clever enough, or well, you don't need to be clever enough. My abilities were good. My abilities meant that I actually could gain confidence in myself and trust myself because I selected an educational format that meant, you know what, actually, I don't need to worry about exams. I don't need to worry about my abilities. I can start going for dream careers, which was really good. It was an excellent move for me. And then after that, I went to university and I did an undergraduate degree in ecology and a master's degree in marine ecology because there's a arrow going the wrong way. I switched from wanting to be a zookeeper to becoming a marine biologist, which was lots of fun. I mean, these degrees were fantastic. I got to travel the world looking at species like these penguins, really cool landscapes. Like this is in the Galapagos Islands, and there's a really gnarly looking fish that we caught in Scotland. Ugh. Even to this day, I think those teeth are horrible. Look at them. But these degrees were fantastic. But at the end of 4 years, I realized, oh, rats, I don't want to become a marine biologist anymore. I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I actually want to become an astrobiologist. So even after spending 4 years in those degrees and spending lots of money on student loans, I realized, you know what? It's okay to switch careers and find my passion later on in life. After this, I took a year out and I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to become an astrobiologist, I need to make sure I'm good at chemistry because remember when I mentioned it earlier, I was failing chemistry in GCSE, so I hadn't touched it in about 10 years. And I thought to myself, right, I need to figure out how to get my head around chemistry. I did that. Went back to basics and took undergraduate modules, online courses, all on chemistry. And I found out I can do it because I was in an educational way that allowed my abilities to shine. And I'm pleased to say that this messy science journey of nearly failing at GCSEs to not doing A levels to wanting to be a zookeeper, then switching to become a marine biologist, and switching again to become an astrobiologist allowed me to get my dream job as an astrobiologist. And now I travel the world collecting samples and thinking about, okay, what is life going to look like in the solar system? Which for me is just a fantastic dream field of research. So all in all, this messy journey, this journey full of hurdles and arrows going the wrong way was good. It was enjoyable. It was worthwhile. And it ultimately got me to my dream job. So if anything from today, have a messy career journey. You do not want something that's steppy. You want to have a messy journey so you can learn more about yourself and learn about how you can achieve your dream job. And with that, I've got 4 seconds left. I will say thank you, and I look forward to hearing about your questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. There are loads of questions flowing in, so please keep them coming, and I will do my best to get through as many of them as we can. Somebody did ask while this was going on, just before we get to your questions, Angus, whether or not this was being recorded, and we are recording it, and you'll be able to find it on YouTube, and there'll be some links at the bottom if you follow us on social media. We'll post out once it's available. So on to the questions. There are loads of them. The first one I'm going to start with is, was there a particular person that inspired you to explore astrobiology?
That's a really good question. For me, I mean, I went into astrobiology looking at the moons that were my favorite. So Titan and Enceladus really got me into astrobiology. And then when I got into the field, I started realizing actually, you know what? A lot of other astrobiologists are like me. They come from different backgrounds, they come from different career stages. Because astrobiology has so many subjects in it, I realized, you know what, actually, all the people that are in it are very similar to me. So it wasn't just one person, it was just more like, actually, it feels like home being around people who sort of have similar backgrounds and scientific or non-scientific backgrounds to you.
Wonderful. There's lots of people who've really appreciated you sharing your messy science journey, by the way.
Good,
Lots of
I'm
people
glad.
are relating to that and are feeling that very deeply because it seems to vibe with
Good.
them. Um, So here's another question about your PhD. Is it mostly
Yes.
home-based, lab-based, or out in the big world?
It's a mix of three. I would say, I enjoy each of them separately. It goes through phases. So for me, I spend time so I look at Iceland, is where my analog sites are. So I go to Iceland a couple of times in my PhD. I spend some weeks there gathering my data, and then I come back, spend a couple of months analyzing them in the lab, and then I spend a couple of months writing them all up. So in a year, there's sort of a split between maybe I don't know, 40 on lab, 40% on home, and 20% on field work. But I would never say no to increasing that field work to more than 20%.
Given the beautiful picture that is behind you of one of your
Oh yeah,
fieldwork
that's
locations,
Iceland.
I couldn't agree more. Which makes the next question potentially a little interesting, but what does a typical day look like for you?
Oh, okay, that's a really good question. So for me, oh, I get up and make a cup of tea. No, I won't do it specifics like that. For me, it depends on what my current project is. At the moment, I'm analyzing my lab data. So for me, I tend to get up, go into the lab in the morning, sort of make sure my samples are okay, start analyzing them to look at what microbes might be in these samples. And then I sort of prepare them to send off for sequencing. And then the rest of my day is spent writing up some chapters, potentially editing some papers, making some really cool graphs. I love making graphs and maps, so I tend to spend a lot of my time doing that. But then also a lot of my day spent reading literature, so looking at what recent publications have people published on my topic that's relevant to me. Have they published my hypothesis? And if they have, then I cry for the next few days. But usually it's spent a good mix of lab work, writing, and reading.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one final quick question,
Nice.
which is taking a few steps back to that course you did in chemistry. Was it the particular course in chemistry, or was it something else? Was it that particular course or the way it was taught? What was it about it that made it click for you?
I think for me, it was more I just understood it because it was in the context of astrobiology. It was in a subject that I was really passionate about because back in school when I did chemistry, it was chemistry that I didn't really understand because I didn't well, for lack of a better term, didn't really want to because it was on a subject that I wasn't really interested in. And so now, and doing that course, I applied um, astrobiology to help me understand chemistry. So it was chemistry of organisms that I was interested in, planets and moons that I was interested in. And then it sort of snowballed into actually, you know what, chemistry is really interesting. And I was wrong before at school because it was really cool. But yeah,
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Angus.
no,
We'll
thank
see you
you.
again in a few minutes. But now we're going to move on to our final speaker, which is Michael. Michael is a lecturer in astrobiology OU at the Open University, working in extreme environments on Earth with extreme evolves that survive within them. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you. Just need to get to presentation mode. Wonderful. That should hopefully be coming through. So thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm a microbiology lecturer, and I specialize in the field of astrobiology. I'm based at the Milton Keynes Open University campus, where I also live with my wonderful wife and our two dogs, Bean and Cosmo, on the middle and on the right, respectively. So what does being an astrobiology researcher or microbiology lecturer actually mean, other than not being particularly tall? So in my job, I get to teach at the Open University. So I teach a combination of some biology for a level 1 module and environmental science for a level 3 module. So I also get to combine that with my research, which is studying microbes that live under extreme conditions. And for my research, that means specifically incredibly salty conditions. So on the left, this is an image of me in Botswana this year. So that was in January. And I actually got to spend my birthday out in the field. In the middle is in the salt flats of Kutch in Gujarat in India. So it's the other way around, as far as the eye can see. It's this incredible white coloration that's from the salts being so thick there. And then on the far right, you have me slowly sinking into the mud in a hypersaline lake in Spain, in the Toledo region. And I actually get to travel quite a lot for this job to perform my research, because these types of environment are located all across the world. And that means I've got to travel to explore and go to these different sites. But I've also got to work with a lot of really interesting people, a lot of very friendly people, and I've got to engage with them with these specific field sites and with the different research that we've done. So it really has been a case of getting to go across the world to explore these extreme environments. So how did I get here? I'm the first person in my family to get to go to university. I knew I enjoyed science. That was always kind of in the background whenever I was in school, and I thought I wanted a career in that direction. So shown here was one of my favorite toys / books growing up. They very cleverly hid a book in a toy. So this is Bunsen and the teacher's pets. You could zip them open, and Bunsen specifically had a set of interesting scientific experiments you could do as a child at home with things around the house. So lots of growing white flowers in food-colored water to see how the flowers slowly change color and things like that. But I was encouraged by my parents to maybe go into science if that was the area that I enjoyed most while I was at school. So at the age of 16 or 17, whilst also getting a part-time job at the local supermarket, my plan was to go into medicine. And this was something I was really interested in pursuing. And I was actually on a course for sixth form students where you get to see lots of different talks by people in the medical profession, different surgeons, different doctors. And it was in fact during this course that I discovered that I have what's known as hemophobia. I can't really stand the sight of blood, and this caused a slight readjustment and pivot in what I was hoping to apply to go to university to do once I finished sixth form. So I realized I still liked science. That was very true. And I liked the idea of maybe going into biomedicine, doing science that was adjacent to medicine and generating research that still could help people and had direct application. So I went to university and I did a biology degree. And during this biology degree, I got to do a quite strange applied research project, but it was researching the microbes that live inside worms. So I spent about 6 months collecting and farming, for want of a better word, worms, and collecting their eggs and just studying the microbes that they have internally that help them better process the soil, help them be the engineers of the soil that we know them to be. So from that project, I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to go into medicine. Maybe microbiology, the thing that I'm most interested in, is the area that I could go into. So when I was then looking for PhDs, I was looking on findaphd.com for basically anything that was microbe facing. And this then led me to a microbe plant interaction based PhD, where I was studying the microbes that grow in association with plants. So growing plants in these acrylic tubes that you can see here, these sealed acrylic tubes, giving them different types of gas, and then seeing how this affected the microbes that grow on top of them. And pictured here, we also have microscope images of some of the microbes that I isolated over the course of my studies. Now, towards the end of my PhD, I was a little bit lost as to what the next step would be. I was still interested in microbiology. I knew I hated growing plants. To be honest, I probably killed an equal number to those that I successfully grew over the course of my PhD research. And I was a little bit lost as to what the next step would be upon submission of my PhD thesis. So I scrolled back recently on Facebook and I found the exact advert that I stumbled upon while I was coming towards the end of my PhD. And this was the advert that I found. So exciting 3-year postdoc position in astrobiology/microbiology at the Open University, which I knew about by reputation for its remote teaching. But because of its specialization in astrobiology for a lot of its microbiology research, I didn't know if I was necessarily trained enough in the relevant area to apply for a position like this. But when I looked at the actual job specification, they wanted a microbiologist to examine whether microbes could maybe survive under simulated extraterrestrial conditions and defining how microbes are surviving under extreme conditions. And I thought, okay, well, I've worked on soil and plant microbes, but a lot of the techniques I know are transferable. And I applied, drove down to Milton Keynes with my dad, and was very luckily successful in getting this postdoc. And then a few years later, I was very fortunate that this postdoc got extension funding and turned into a second position. And then off the back of that, I was able to become a permanent lecturer in microbiology at the Open University. So it was still a biology facing field, but it was definitely a bit of a left field turn, and especially considering that my original plan at 16, unaware I can't stand the sight of blood, was medicine. So how does working with microbes actually mean I work with space? So microbes that live in extreme environments are considered extremophiles. That's their scientific definition. And we can study extremophiles to try and study other planets and celestial bodies in the solar system, as Angus so wonderfully introduced in his talk. So working with the extreme environment that's pictured here, we were able to identify some metabolisms that maybe microbes on early Mars, when it was a water-rich planet, could have used to survive. So we have the scientific paper shown here, and then we have a paper that we produced for Frontiers for Young Minds summarizing this research, also shown. We also use extremophiles to try and understand, okay, if we simulate these chemistries, what we think Martian waters were like, what microbes do we see growing, and what evidence do they leave behind that maybe the future Mars missions could go out and look for? But there are also many applications that by studying Mars through the study of extremophiles, we can also use to better environments on Earth. So we can also use extremophiles to help clean up pollution. So when we have fluids that are contaminated with organic dyes and heavy metals, we can use extremophiles to drop these out of solution. You can see here, it's gone clearer. There's more black at the bottom, and that means that the metals have left the fluid and the dyes have been broken down. And we can even potentially use extremophiles as sources of novel medicines. So I went to Droitwich Spa in October of last year, which is just outside of Birmingham. Very luckily was able to collect these saltwater samples, isolate microbes from that, And we're now able to show in the lab that these microbes adapted to these extreme conditions are able to kill MRSA and a whole host of other human-associated pathogens and disease-causing microbes. So by studying extremophores to study Mars, this is also, in a very roundabout way, led to research that allows us to gain a better understanding of how to help life on Earth. So yeah, I'm very fortunate that after a bit of a pivot from my initial career intentions, wanting to study medicine, I've been able to work with really engaged and interesting researchers from around the world, and I get to work in astrobiology at the Open University.
Wonderful. That's another amazing talk. Thank you very much, Michael. So we have, again, got lots of questions flowing in, so please keep adding yours into the Q&A, and we will do our best to get round to those. So let me start with, what types of things have you found in the ultra salty environments that you studied?
That's a very cool question. So in the Mars analog environments we've studied, we found that sulfur cycling microbes are doing typically quite well, which is incredibly relevant for Mars because these environments on Mars are also very sulfur rich, meaning it possibly represents an available energy source. About the research that we published, if you think about the smell of a blocked drain or rotten eggs, that's sulfide. That's what was giving that sediment its black coloration. And in these studies, we showed that they were incredibly abundant microbes, able to use that as an energy source. And if we tested that against the chemistry of Martian waters, they were not only incredibly viable, some of them grew to quite high abundances. So by studying those salt-rich environments, we can start to pinpoint, okay, what metabolisms maybe would have been able to fuel life on early Mars if it was ever present.
Amazing. The next question is, how will we be able to use these microbes in medicine?
So microbes produce a lot of interesting compounds. One major group of compounds they produce is antimicrobials or antibiotics, and they're producing this as a competitive strategy. They want to eliminate other microbes that they're growing near so that they get more resources to grow on. And what we've historically done in the past is we've been able to extract these specific compounds, mass produce them, and after extensive testing, use them as antimicrobials for medical applications. So if we think about penicillin all the way through to the more modern antibiotics, what we're hoping to do with these extremophilic microbes is find new antibiotics, which we very urgently need because microbes over time just develop resistance to selection pressures, which means that in hospitals, we're starting to see resistance to some of the older antibiotics.
Here's another question then. So when finding life in a solar system, how likely do you think that life is to have come from Earth?
That is a fantastic question. So it's a major area of research called planetary protection within astrobiology, because when we send the rovers and the orbiters and the landers to these other bodies in the solar system, we don't want to accidentally transfer microbes that decades from now we detect remnants of and think, oh, fantastic, life on another planet. And so they have to be incredibly sterilized to go out to these other bodies. There is a school of thought that possibly if there were ever life on Mars, it could have had the origin of life occur there and then transferred either life, early life, or organic molecules to Earth, which does raise a whole host of other questions and also doesn't answer a lot about the chemistry of how life could have started. I'd say not impossible, but in terms of younger celestial bodies like Enceladus, it would be much more likely that it would be a completely independent origin of life event.
Wonderful, thank you. One final question before I invite everyone back in to join us. It's always hard to pick just one. There are so many. Let me see. Do you think that microbes could potentially used to clean up rubbish or trash in the oceans?
Definitely. And there's actually, I mean, one of the wonderful things about microbes is they are often already doing the thing that we want them to do. We just need to find a way to harness that better. The fact that nylon didn't always exist, and within a few years we had microbes that could break down nylon. So plastic waste that is in the ocean, there are already microbes growing on that plastic and are slowly breaking it down. The problem is that takes quite a long time. And if you just go from bulk plastic to nanoplastic, that can maybe get taken up by other things that live in the ocean, like fish. So there is a lot of research into other ways we can enhance the breakdown of plastics so that we avoid the nanoplastics issue. There's also really exciting research into effectively a type of worm that can eat styrofoam, and they themselves can't eat styrofoam in the same way termites can't eat wood. It's the microbes inside their guts that are breaking that down and giving them the carbon that they need. So microbes have a lot of amazing potential applications for the cleanup of pollution, including plastics. It's just a case of minimizing the inputs to that system, so less plastic going into the ocean, and helping the processes that are happening naturally.
Amazing. I had no idea about that worm. That sounds incredibly cool. I'm definitely going to look into it. So with that, Angus and Martina, if I could ask you to turn back on your cameras and join us for the last just over 10 minutes, where we've got questions that are going to go to all of you, so you can pick who chooses it, who answers it, sorry. Or if you all want to chip in, that's great too. So the first question I have for you is, what is your favorite part of your job? Who wants to take this first? I'll pick on one of you. Michael, you're looking directly at me. You're going first. What's your favorite part of your job?
So since becoming a lecturer, I now spend less time in the lab, but I have PhD students, and they come up with fascinating research questions, and I get to troubleshoot experiment design with them, and they write papers and their theses, and I get to read those. And I think getting to engage with my PhD students is my favorite part of my job, because they come up with such fascinating approaches to research that I never would have been able to do, and I wouldn't have got to experience if it wasn't for getting to work with them.
I'm sure for the two PhD students on this call, that is a wonderful thing to hear. Let's go to Martina next. What's the favourite part of what you do?
So I think at the end of a project, we do this thing called benefits mapping. So when we present to the Space Agency what we've done, we say what we think it might do in the future. And I find that the best part, thinking that it could end up, doing this for people, or it could end up in this other project. And that always feels like a huge privilege to have been a part of that initial project, and then seeing where that goes.
Amazing. Angus?
I mean, the answer off the top of my head is field work, but I think that's a bit obvious. But honestly, I think my favorite part is it's just sort of communicating how awesome space actually is, because there is a certain look you get when you tell somebody something about space they didn't realize. And it's just so amazing to help people understand how cool space actually is, and how there actually is the potential for life out there. And I think that's, yeah, really good bit of that.
Amazing. So the next question is from someone who is asking that at 47, they're about to embark upon a career change into an OU Space Science Masters, but are feeling perhaps too old, but are still determined to go for it. They say that they have a love of the solar system and the related missions. And do they have any advice on overcoming the age fear? And is there any advice that you might be able to give them for their new journey?
I think I should take this one, being the oldest and having done that exact thing. I didn't expect to have this big career change kind of later on in life, and I would say just embrace where you're at. Your own experience and what you're bringing to the table is going to be so valuable. You can't get away from the fact that you're coming at this from a different angle, and I think that should be seen as a good thing. So yeah, don't see it as a negative, and just be totally open to everything you're about to learn and experience. I think it's wonderful that you're having a career change, definitely.
Amazing. And there's someone else on the call who has also said an OU Masters at 56, go for it. So lots of people are feeling it's just a great step. Here's the next question. Is it only astrobiologists who do fieldwork in space research?
I can hop in. Absolutely not, no. You can be whatever science job you want to be and still go on field work and contribute to a research project on space. I mean, back when I was wanting to be a marine biologist, I went on multiple field works to volcanic regions and looked at how organisms were dispersed or moved in relation to different rock types. And that exact sort of hypothesis can then be applied to multiple things in space. So absolutely, if you want to not be an astrobiologist and still contribute to space and go on really cool field work, you can still contribute to really cool space missions. Even on the engineering side of things as well, just off the top of my head, you can really help with how instruments are built, tested, and where they should be tested. It opens a whole can of worms. But yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Not to start any fights with my next question, but somebody has asked, astronomy or planetary science? I'm torn between which path to follow for my degree. What would be your pitch for planetary sciences? Michael, let's start with you.
I was terrible at physics at school, and therefore probably am not the best person to ask this specific question. I think there is a natural appeal to space, and for me, astrobiology was a way I still got to engage with that interest, whilst being a terrible physicist. But I will pass it over to the others.
I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on either, but my advice is, and this is what I say to everyone who's struggling to choose a degree, is pick whichever one is more broad, because the broader degree that you have, the more subjects and modules you can engage with in university. And yes, okay, some of those subjects might not be what you want, some of them you might struggle in, but you'll find others, you'll find like nuggets of gold, and you can realize, actually, you know what, that's the subject I want to go into. And you couldn't find that with a broad subject. So astronomy, planetary science, they'll both have, if you did astronomy, it'll have planetary science modules. And if you did planetary science, it'll have astronomy modules. So it just depends on which has more broader modules and which institution offers one that you find more appealing.
I think that's a beautiful answer. Martina, anything to add, or are you just blown away by those choices?
Yeah, I'm just loving this in its entirety. So no, I would just say learning at any capacity takes motivation and commitment. So always try and go for what lights you up, where you're kind of most interested. So look at the topics, and yeah, a broad approach is a great idea.
I think we've probably got time for a couple more questions. So the next one I'm going to go for is, are there any other areas you would like to research in the future?
So for me, the antibiotic production is research strands that's only been running for a few months, and it's both a fascinating area and a major societal issue. So that's something that I'm really hoping to focus, not just antibiotic production, but applications of extremophiles. I think there are lots of societal issues that extremophiles can potentially be used to solve.
Amazing. Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just
Go for it.
no,
There you go.
Add to what Michael said by so because I'm looking at societal benefits as a whole, it's so broad. There will be topics like this in healthcare and things I would never have expected that I know I'm going to be so passionate about researching. So it's wonderful in this industry that there are so many different avenues that you never know what you'll end up researching and looking into.
I think, yeah, just to add to that, I mean, my research can help sort of mission designers and engineers look at, do we need to fly to sample life, or do we need to actually land on the planet or moon? And in another life, I would have absolutely loved to actually get into the nitty gritty of that and understand, okay, what does that actually mean? Because it's all good me putting that on an abstract or a paper, but that involves years and years of work. So I'd love to actually look at the engineering side of things and understand, how can my research help on a multiple scale for both in space and looking at the dispersion of things on Earth. I mean, also just a little quick point, I haven't gone into much of my research, but a lot of it is quite useful for transfer of particulates, so COVID transmission, disease transmission in the air, pollution in cities. So a lot of my work looks at stuff like that. So it could be applied to other novel approaches, like what mask you need to wear, or how far away do you need to be from pollution to stay healthy. So, yeah.
Amazing. And following on from that, but taking a slightly different path, and this might be our final question depending on how quickly you answer it. If you weren't doing what you are doing now, what do you think that you would be doing? So I'm gonna keep talking just for a moment so you can consider that. And I'm not going to allow Martina to fall back onto her fabulous music career. She's going to have to pick something else. So has anyone got a quick answer? Do they know what they would be doing if they weren't doing what they are doing?
So if I hadn't found the postdoc at the Open University and then been lucky enough to actually get the post, I was quite earnestly looking into PGCEs, because there was a big call at the time for science teachers. I think there's fairly consistently a call for science teachers, and so going into higher education after finishing my PhD.
Wonderful. So we'd have one teacher. Angus?
I think, yeah, following on from Michael, if I didn't switch into being an astrobiologist, my research looked at how whales migrate in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. So I would have probably stuck with being a polar marine biologist and done some really cool stuff with that, probably.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
Pretty fun.
Martina?
So I didn't initially know. I was racking my brain because originally I thought I'd love to go into nursing, but I am the same. I can't be around blood at all. So that was out. But we had recently, I think it was just last year, at astrobiology, we had a talk from someone at the UKSA about international relations. And it wasn't something I'd ever thought about, but it was fascinating. And I definitely have already been kind of looking into more about that. And so who knows in the future.
Wow, what a different set of lives you could have had. But we're all very grateful that you aren't astronauts and that you aren't doing those other things, and that you are here with us in space. So we are heading towards the time where we need to wrap up, which leads me to do a few housekeeping things at the end. So firstly, thank you to our panelists. I'm sure everyone who has been here today will share my thanks. There have been so many questions coming in, and I do apologise if we haven't gotten to yours, but hopefully you've enjoyed this whilst you've been with us. So thank you everyone final time for coming along. Thank you for our speakers, Angus, Michael and Martina. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you at something soon. Goodbye.